So we've had a growing problem in our American communities since 1965. And that issue is the growing amount of children who grow up without their biological fathers. Now, in the modern United States, the US Census estimates that 33% or 18.3 million children grow up without their biological fathers. Now, this massive amount of people are not only missing out on an important part of their family, but also on all the benefits that a father can bring. Now, we've all heard, I'm sure, that there's a link between fatherlessness and crime, but it's difficult to find numbers on these because of how censuses count households, right? They don't usually ask if the man and the woman that might be married, if the children belong to both of them biologically. But efforts have been made, and it has come up that a child growing up in a mother-only household is twice as likely to end up incarcerated as one growing up with both of their parents. So this massive spike in crime, criminology a word? Yeah. In criminology is a big issue, as well as all of the behavioral issues that we in the education field, I'm sure, run into a lot. You know, you look at your IEP, and it's not really surprising when the two parents listed have different last names. Additionally, you know, there's been studies that sort of try to delve deeper into this, and they find that the younger a child is, the worse the effects are. And there was one study in particular that found that girls whose father vanished before they are 5 years old are 5 times as likely to have a teen pregnancy than the general population, which is concerning. You know, we generally frown upon that sort of thing. But how did this problem come about? You know, where are all these dads going? So there are a couple issues, of course. There's rising divorce since 1965, which some 95% of people above the age of 25 were married at that time. And now it's much lower. You know, you don't see a lot of young couples around, certainly not young couples with children. But it also happens to be that a lot of young men wind up in prison. You know, there's been growing incarceration in America for a long time. And if the father's in prison, he's not there for his kids. And oftentimes he doesn't want to be there. And that's why they grow up without their father, because he went up and left. He didn't want to take care of the kids. Or parents had a falling out and dad's not involved anymore because the divorce proceedings, or maybe he wasn't interested before and now he doesn't have a reason to stick around. But going more into especially the issue that young boys have when they miss their fathers, right? There's this need in young boys for order and whatnot that a single mother generally cannot provide, and that their non-biological father, another one comes into the equation, is often not interested in providing. And that's, you know, you have the mother generally in our sort of romanticized idea of the family. You have the mother, and she takes care of the children, and she's supposed to instill, you know, all sorts of wonderful virtues of compassion and charity. But it's very difficult to do that, as well as, you know, diligence and the need to have discipline. Because if someone's always, you know, cracking the whip at you, telling you can't do that, you know, it's very difficult to emphasize with that person fully, right? So it's a difficult situation for these kids. They're not being socialized as best as they could. right? And that's obviously compounded by modern internet usage. You know, the kids sort of have their childhood taken from them in that manner. But back to the issue I was talking about, it's not just the problem for these young boys who grow out without the firm guiding hand of their father. There's also all the young girls who don't have, you know, I hate to cite Sigmund Freud, but you know, he sort of had that when children grow up, they look at their parents and the relationship that they have. And then when they grow up subconsciously, they look for something similar to that. Okay. And if there is no man in the household, or if, you know, you have a woman, she gets married, maybe she doesn't nowadays, she has a kid, dad leaves, we don't just expect her to be alone with the kid for the rest of her life, you know. She's gonna go out, probably find another man, and that's, you know, oftentimes doesn't quite work out. So there's this rotating door of new men coming in to sort of stand in and play father for a couple of years. And this lack of stability can be very damaging on a young woman who doesn't really have a good example of what she should be looking for in a man. There's also, in many studies you look for, they say that fatherlessness isn't really a good thing we should go by, because a lot of these kids who end up in prison or with behavioral issues are also in poor communities. But that sort of ignores the fact that it's very difficult for a single mother raising children to have any sort of wealth without the second income, especially with modern economic issues, that it compounds not only in the social issue, but also in resources. You know, the child, the family doesn't have everything that a second parental figure would provide. And this leads us to, you know, what can we do about this as teachers, as educators? And sadly, due to how the schools are constructed, even though society, parents try to push more and more of the parental responsibilities onto the school, they're not really able to fulfill that need. You know, you have the kid for 6.5, maybe 7 hours a day, 5 days a week for 2/3 of the year. It's not enough to fully raise this child, especially because in public schools, at least, some smaller private schools are organized differently, but you have a new teacher every year. And so we come back to this issue of the revolving door, right? You don't have, and of course, a single teacher can have a huge impact on your life, but it's not for long enough that they can have the same impact that a parent would. So we have to, as parents and society hands more opportunity, responsibility onto us, we have to find someone who can properly fill this specific niche, right? And thankfully, there are a couple of organizations out there, right? And young boys, especially, sports are great in the older ones because they have this aggression innately, right? And without a masculine figure in their life, they don't really know what to do with all of that. And so they go out and they vandalize random stuff and they start fights with their classmates. But if you can get them on a team, then they have that brotherhood, that connection with each other, and they have a way to get out all of this energy and aggression that they have within them. And then generally we have for the younger kids, we have after school program, keep them for a little longer in a more stable, happier environment. We can impart more onto them of what they should be when they grow up. And I'd also like to mention there's some organizations out there like Big Brothers, Big Sisters of America, right? And it connects them with an older person who's, you know, not old enough that the child would think there's some, you know, 60-year-old grandma trying to tell them what to do, which is how anyone over 25 looks to an elementary schooler. And I think it's a really great organization because it's over a longer time that this child can bond with this person, this role model, and they can see what they should be in society.